There's a cost you pay to see what others don't see, a price no one explains to you before your spiritual awakening begins, and it might just be the most painful secret of the spiritual journey. Eckhart Tolle experienced this in an extreme way. Before his awakening, he was deeply depressed. He wanted to die. But after his awakening, he found himself in a solitude of a different kind. A solitude few people understand. The solitude of the one who sees. You know what I'm talking about. You look around you and you see things that no one else seems to notice. You see the unnecessary suffering. You see the games of the ego. You see the absurdity of so many human pursuits. And the worst part is, you can't talk about it, because when you try, people look at you like you're crazy, or pretentious, or just plain weird. So you learn to be silent, to carry what you see in silence. That's the cost, and no one warned you. But let me tell you something. That might just change your perspective on all of this. This cost that you're paying, it's not a punishment. It's a passage, and there's something on the other side that you can't even imagine yet. Eckhart Tolle explains that the awakening of consciousness inevitably creates a period of isolation, not because there's something wrong with you, but because you're going through a transformation that most people haven't experienced yet. Imagine you were sleeping with everyone else in a big room, and suddenly you wake up, you see that it's a dream, but the others continue to sleep and dream. You can't just shake them and wake them up. It doesn't work like that, and you can't voluntarily go back to sleep either. You're awake in a world of sleepers, and it's profoundly lonely. Here's the first truth you need to understand about this cost. It doesn't last forever, even if it seems endless, when you're in it. Eckhart Tolle spent years in this state, sitting on park benches, barely speaking to anyone, living in almost complete isolation. But gradually, something changed. Other awakened people started to find him. People who were seeking were drawn to him. A community formed around his presence. That's what will happen to you too, if you stay authentic on your path. Other awakened souls will find you. Not because you're desperately looking for them, but because presence attracts presence. Now let me talk to you about the different forms this cost takes, because it doesn't manifest the same way for everyone. The first form is the loss of old relationships. When you start to see the truth, certain relationships become impossible to maintain, not because you're judging others, but because the superficial connection no longer nourishes you. You might have friends you used to go out with regularly. You'd talk about this and that. You'd complain together. You'd participate in the same dramas. But now, those conversations seem empty. You no longer feel like complaining. You no longer find any interest in gossip. The dramas of others fatigue you instead of entertaining you. And these friends sense that you've changed. They don't understand why. Some feel rejected. Others find you boring. Still others think you've become arrogant. The truth is, you're no longer on the same frequency, and no one wants to hear that. The second form of the cost is the misunderstanding of family. This might be the most painful, because your family has known you forever. They have an image of who you are, and that image no longer corresponds to who you're becoming. Your parents might worry. They think you've joined a cult or some fringe group, or that you're going through a crisis. They want to bring you back to normal, to their version of you. Your spouse might feel abandoned because you're no longer interested in the same things. Your priorities have changed. What mattered enormously yesterday now seems secondary. Eckhart Tolle says, this is one of the most difficult trials of the spiritual journey. Staying true to yourself while navigating the expectations of those you love. The third form is the loss of meaning in your work. Many people who awaken go through a professional crisis, not because they're no longer capable of working, but because the work they were doing suddenly loses all its meaning. You look at your career and you wonder why you're doing this. The money, the status and the security, all these motivations suddenly seem superficial. But you have responsibilities, bills to pay, maybe a family to feed. You can't just abandon everything. It's a terrible tension between what you now see as true and the obligations of daily life. Eckhart Tolle himself lived through this period. He spent years without traditional employment, living on almost nothing, until his teaching became his calling. But not everyone is called to teach, and the path of transition is different for everyone. The fourth form of the cost is inner loneliness. Even if you're surrounded by people, you can feel profoundly alone, because the real connection you're looking for, is rare. You want to talk about deep things, about the nature of consciousness, about the reality of the ego, about the illusion of time, about what it truly means to be alive. But most people aren't interested in these subjects, or they're interested in them in a superficial way. A few minutes of philosophical discussion before returning to everyday worries. This loneliness can become overwhelming. It can make you doubt your own mental health. You wonder if you're the problem, if you're simply incapable of normal relationships. But Eckhart Tolle reminds us that this loneliness is actually a portal, a passage to a deeper connection, first with yourself, then with life itself. The fifth form is perhaps the most subtle. It's grieving your former self. When you awaken, you lose something. You lose the innocence of not knowing. You lose the ability to lose yourself completely in the illusions of the world. It's a bit like the child who discovers that Santa Claus doesn't exist. He gains in maturity, but he loses something too, a certain magic. You look back, and you see a version of yourself who could fully believe in the promises of the world. Money will bring happiness. Success will bring fulfillment. Recognition will bring peace. That version of you is gone. And even though it was necessary, even though it was a liberation, there's a grieving to be done. Grieving your former self. Now that you understand the different forms of the cost, let me reveal something that Eckhart Tolle teaches on this subject. The cost isn't paid in vain. It buys something of inestimable value. What you gain in exchange for the cost is freedom. A freedom that most people will never know. The freedom to no longer be a slave to the ego, to no longer be manipulated by your own thoughts, to no longer desperately seek outside what has always been within. Is this freedom worth the cost? Tolle would say that the question doesn't even arise, because once you've tasted this freedom, you would never want to go back, even if you could. But here's where it gets really interesting. The cost that you pay isn't just for you. It's also for others. Each person who experiences a spiritual awakening creates a little more space of consciousness in the world. Each person who sees the truth weakens the collective structures of the ego a little. You are like a scout, moving forward into unknown territory. Yes, it's dangerous. Yes, it's lonely. But you're paving the way for those who will come after. Eckhart Tolle often talks about the collective transformation of consciousness. He says that we are at a crucial moment in human evolution, and that those who are awakening now are playing an essential role in this transformation. This isn't to flatter your ego. This isn't to make you feel special. It's simply to remind you that your suffering has meaning, that your solitude serves something greater now. Let me tell you about what happens on the other side of the cost. Because there is another side, and it's magnificent. On the other side of the cost, there's a peace that doesn't depend on anything external. A peace that is the same, whether you're alone or surrounded by people, whether you have money or not, whether people understand you or not. This peace isn't an emotional state. It's not a pleasant feeling that comes and goes. It's a fundamental reality, the reality of what you truly are, beneath all the layers of conditioning. Tolle says that this peace is our natural state. We've simply forgotten it. And the process of spiritual awakening, with all its cost, is simply the process of remembering it. On the other side of the cost, there's also a new form of connection. Deeper, truer, more satisfying. When you stop desperately seeking to be understood, something paradoxical happens. You start to connect with others on a deeper level, not at the level of words, not at the level of shared opinions, but at the level of being. You can be with someone in silence and feel a complete connection. You can look a stranger in the eye and recognize the same consciousness looking back. This connection doesn't depend on whether the other person is awakened or not. It depends on your ability to see beyond the mask of the ego, to recognize the essence beneath the appearance. On the other side of the cost, there's a renewed ability to appreciate life. When you no longer seek happiness outside yourself, you discover a simple joy in the little things. The sun on your skin, the taste of coffee, the sound of the rain. These ordinary things become extraordinary when you're fully present to them, when you're not lost in your thoughts about the past or the future. Tolle recounts how after his spiritual awakening, he could sit for hours, simply watching the trees. Not because he had nothing else to do, but because it was enough, more than enough. On the other side of the cost, there's also an end to the fear of death. Death, which terrorizes most people, loses its power when you realize that you're not this body, that you're not this mind, that what truly defines you cannot die because it was never born. This isn't a belief. It's not a consolation. It's a direct realization, a knowing that comes from experience, not from thought. And this freedom from the fear of death changes everything. It allows you to live fully, without holding back, without calculating, without constantly protecting what in any case cannot be protected. Now, I want to give you some practical advice for getting through this period of the cost. First piece of advice: don't resist the cost. Resistance makes it worse. If you fight against the loneliness, it becomes more crushing. If you desperately try to maintain relationships that no longer work, you suffer more. Accept that this is a phase. Accept that the cost must be paid, not with resignation, but with conscious acceptance. Tolle often says that suffering comes from resistance to what is. The more you accept the cost, the lighter it becomes. Second piece of advice: cultivate presence in the midst of isolation. Isolation can be a blessing in disguise. It forces you to turn inward, to discover the resources that are within you rather than outside. Use this time to deepen your practice. Meditate. Observe your thoughts. Feel your body. Listen to the silence. What you find within during this period will accompany you forever. Third piece of advice: don't isolate yourself completely. There's a difference between conscious solitude and defensive isolation. The first is a choice. The second is an escape. Continue to interact with the world, even if it's difficult, even if the connections seem superficial, because it's in the interaction with others that your consciousness sharpens. Tolle has never advocated withdrawing from the world. On the contrary, he teaches that the world is the perfect training ground for presence. Fourth piece of advice: seek out fellow travelers. You're not the only one going through this. There are other people right now who are paying the same cost, who are seeing the same things, who feel just as lonely. Find them. Through books, through videos, through meditation groups, through retreats. Even just one conversation with someone who understands can sustain you for months. Fifth piece of advice: be patient with those who don't understand. It's tempting to judge those who are still asleep, to despise them for their ignorance, to feel superior. But that would simply be the ego, disguising itself as spirituality. Remember that you too were once asleep, that a spiritual awakening isn't a personal achievement, that you simply had the luck, or the necessary suffering, to wake up, treat others with the compassion you would have wanted so when you were in their place. Sixth piece of advice, and this may be the most important: trust the process. The cost you're paying isn't a mistake. It's not a sign that something is wrong. It's a necessary part of the transformation. Think of a chrysalis. The inside seems chaotic. The caterpillar almost completely dissolves, but from this chaos emerges the butterfly. You are in your chrysalis. The cost you're paying is the dissolution of the old form, and something new is being born. Eckhart Tolle himself went through years of this process. Years where nothing seemed to be moving forward. Years of simple presence, with no visible results. But all that time something was building, something invisible, that would eventually manifest. Trust that the same thing, Eckhart, is happening within you. Now I want to share a perspective that Tolle offers on this subject, and it changes everything. He says, the cost isn't really a cost. It's a liberation. What you lose weren't real connections. They were connections based on the ego. What you lose wasn't a true identity. It was a mask you were wearing. You're not losing anything real. You're only losing what wasn't you. And that loss, even if it's painful, is actually a relief from all that weight you were carrying without even knowing. You were carrying it. Have you ever taken off a really heavy backpack that you'd been carrying for so long that you'd forgotten it was there? That feeling of sudden lightness and of liberation. That's what awaits you on the other side of the cost. But here's the final paradox that Tolle invites us to consider. The cost and the reward are not separated in time. They happen simultaneously. Each moment of loneliness is also a moment of presence. Each loss is also a gain. Each death of the ego is also a rebirth of consciousness. You don't have to wait until you've finished paying the cost to receive the reward. The reward is already here, in this very moment, in that consciousness that observes all of this. If you can see this, really see this, then the cost ceases to be a burden. It simply becomes what is, a part of the flow of life, neither good nor bad, simply present. And that's where true liberation is found, not in some future where the cost will be paid, but now, in the complete acceptance of what is. Let me tell you a story that I heard. There was a man who had been searching for the truth for years. He had read all the books, followed all the teachers, practiced all the techniques, and he suffered enormously. He felt alone, misunderstood, lost between two worlds. One day, he met an old sage and asked him when this suffering would end. The sage smiled and said, "The suffering will end when you stop wanting it to end." The man didn't understand. How could he stop wanting his suffering to end? The sage explained, "You suffer from your loneliness, but you suffer even more from your resistance to that loneliness. You suffer from your misunderstanding, but you suffer even more from your struggle against that misunderstanding. The cost you're paying isn't the problem. It's your relationship to the cost. That's the problem." The man understood something that day. He stopped struggling against his situation. He accepted the cost completely. And in that acceptance, he found exactly what he'd been searching for from the beginning, the peace that depends on nothing. Now it's up to you to decide how you're going to bear this cost. You can bear it like a burden, complaining, wishing things were different, waiting for a better future. Or you can bear it like a teacher, learning what it has to show you, using each difficulty as an opportunity to practice presence. The cost is the same, but the experience is completely different. Tolle says that everything that happens can be either an obstacle to a way or a teaching. The difference is in the consciousness with which you meet it. If you meet the cost with resistance, it becomes an obstacle. If you meet it with presence, it becomes a teaching. And the teaching is always the same. Be present. Accept what is. See that everything is impermanent, that everything passes, that nothing of what you really are can be threatened. Here's what I want you to remember from all of this. You pay a cost to see the truth. That's a fact. You lose things, relationships, beliefs, identities, a certain way of living in the world. But what you gain is infinitely more precious. You gain yourself, your true nature, that eternal consciousness that observes everything without being touched by anything. And you gain the ability to be truly helpful to others, not by changing them, not by convincing them, but simply by being that presence that reminds them of who they really are. The world needs people who pay this cost, people who see the truth, even when it's difficult, people who stay awake, even when everyone else is asleep. You are one of those people, and even if it's lonely, even if it's painful, it's also the greatest honor, because you're participating in something bigger than yourself, in the evolution of consciousness itself, in the transformation of humanity. This isn't grandiosity, it's simply the truth of what happens when a consciousness awakens. Each individual awakening contributes to the collective awakening. Each person who sees the truth weakens the structures of illusion. Each cost paid opens the way for those who will come after. So bear your cost with dignity, not with arrogance and not with complaint, with the simple dignity of someone who knows why they're doing what they're doing, and know that you're not alone. Even when you feel alone, there are other awakened consciousnesses all over the world who are paying the same cost, who are seeing the same truths, who are going through the same dark nights. You're part of an invisible community, a community of those who have chosen to see, even when it was difficult, even when it was lonely, even when no one understood. And that community is growing every day. More people are awakening. More people are seeing. More people are paying the cost. One day, the cost will feel lighter because there will be more people awake to share it. More understanding, more support. You are paving the way for that day. Every day you stay true to what you see. Every day you continue, despite the difficulty. You're doing something important, even if no one sees it, even if no one recognizes it. The universe sees it. Consciousness itself sees it, and that's enough. For those of you who are intensely feeling this cost right now, I want to tell you this. It will pass. Not because the circumstances will change, but because your relationship to those circumstances will change. You will find peace amidst the loneliness. You will find connection beyond the misunderstanding. You will find your place in a world where you thought you didn't belong, because your place isn't an external location. It's an internal state, and that state is available now, in this very moment. Close your eyes for a moment and feel your breath. Feel the presence that is always there, beneath all your thoughts and emotions. That presence is your true home. It's there. Regardless of the price you pay, it's there. Whether you're alone or surrounded by others, it's there. Whether people understand you or not. That's where you find peace. Not by changing your situation, but by grounding yourself in what never changes. Eckhart Tolle has said something magnificent about this subject. He said that the suffering of the spiritual seeker is the ego's last trick. It's the ego, pretending to be a seeker of truth, and suffering because it can't find it. But the truth isn't something to find, it's what you are. It has always been there, never hidden, simply ignored. And the cost you're paying isn't the price for finding the truth. It's the price for stopping the search in places where it isn't. When you stop searching outside yourself, when you stop needing others to understand you, when you stop fighting against what is, the truth is simply there, obvious, luminous, impossible to miss. And the cost you thought you were paying reveals itself to be a gift, the gift of final liberation from everything that was preventing you from seeing what has always been true. If this video has touched you, share it with someone who's going through this same trial. Together, we are stronger. Together, we pay the cost less heavily. And don't forget to subscribe to receive more transmissions on the spiritual awakening journey. Next time, I'll talk to you about something that few people dare to admit about this path, something that might shock you. Until then, stay present, stay true, and remember, the price you pay is nothing compared to what you receive